is Jen Rifkin. I am from Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services. But Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services is now the service provider at Westborough Youth and Family Services, just to make everyone's lives very, very confusing. But in any case, I'm the clinic director of both the Shrewsbury and Westborough clinics. So if you're ever looking for counseling, and if you live in Shrewsbury or Westborough, we can provide that free of charge. And all you gotta do is just sort of reach out to me, and I believe my contact information is here somewhere. But in any case, welcome to Mental Health 101. Thank you guys for joining us today. I know it's an extra beautiful day, so extra thank you guys for being here, and hopefully I can provide you with some useful information. So this is basically a very brief overview of what mental health is. I feel like we talk about it all the time, and one of the wonderful things that I hear about it more and more in the media. I hear in particular children talking a lot more about mental health, but we don't really have a working definition, I think, in the sort of general grand scheme of things about what it actually is. So this is sort of my general way I conceptualize mental health. It's just sort of our overall well-being. And it's critical throughout your life. Everywhere from infancy all the way through the day before you die, mental health is really, really important, and it's also something that we should be working on. In the same way that we're working on our physical health, we should always be working on our mental health. It really affects everything. It affects how we feel, it affects how we behave, it affects our relationships. There's sort of no part of our lives that mental health doesn't impact. And that last piece here, how we handle stress, how we relate to others, how we make choices, that I think to me is sort of the crux of why mental health is so important. We talk about mental health all the time, and usually it's conveyed as sort of negative. Oh, you have negative mental health. You have positive mental health. We're not really talking about it because it just means you're doing well. But what does that actually mean to have positive mental health? I think this is sort of what it is. It's when we can live our full potential in the same way that if you're able-bodied, if you are not managing chronic conditions, or maybe even you are, but they're under control, you can live life fully. And that's the same thing for our mental health. When we have positive mental health, we can kind of live life the way we want to. We're able to cope with whatever stressors come our way. It doesn't mean that we're never going to feel anxious, we're never going to feel down, we're never going to feel angry, because those are normal parts of life, but we have the ability to manage them. We can engage in our lives productively. We can learn, we can work, we can go to school, wherever, whatever stage of life you're in. All of that, if you're able to do it well, it means you probably have some level of positive mental health. And to me, I think about this all the time. You see those signs or those posters in Target and Walmart, live, laugh, love, learn. I think about mental health as your ability to meet those Walmart and Target signs. Live, laugh, love, and learn. So if you can do those things, that means your mental health is probably fairly positive. On the flip side, mental illness. If you can leave here with nothing today, I want people to leave here remembering that mental illness is a health condition that is treatable. It's just unlike having a sore throat or a broken leg. It's something that we can't obviously see, but we can notice it through changes in behavior, changes in thinking, changes in emotion, all of that type of stuff. And it's often associated with sort of basic life functioning issues, problems in school, problems in work, problems with relationships, problems getting to family activities, problems keeping your house clean. I'm not saying if you're messy and you didn't do the dishes last night, you have a mental health issue. In fact, I believe I am guilty of not doing the dishes last night. But it does impact your life. And again, it impacts your ability, if we go back to this slide, to live, laugh, love, and learn. In terms of what causes mental illness, there's really a whole host of factors, and I can't really pin it down to one. I'm sure this is nothing you guys don't know, but there are sort of genetic pieces, or sort of your overall brain chemistry. There's a ton of research that's come out over the last 15, 20 years about the importance of your brain chemistry in your mental health. Sometimes you're born with sort of a little bit of an altered brain chemistry, and I can tell you, my son, he has really significant ADHD. His brain, his dopamine levels just live a little bit lower than my dopamine levels, for example. And sometimes it's brain chemistry it's it's not how you were born, it's sort of a whole host of factors, like your life experiences, like trauma, abuse, all of that can actually obviously impact your sort of overall emotional being, but it can impact your brain chemistry too, which is sort of wild. Anytime you think about stress, what's a hormone that pops up? It's cortisol, goes up in your brain. That impacts how your brain functions. And so it can be hard to live with all of these things, the stress, school difficulties, social difficulties, all of that impacts both your sort of functioning on a outward basis as well as your brain chemistry. And so it's really a conglomerate of both the sort of external and internal factors that are going to be impacting your mental health and mental illness overall. Left untreated, you're more likely to develop alcohol and other substance use disorders. You're more likely to develop a second mental health disorder. You're more likely to have difficulties in your overall sort of life functioning at school, in your relationships, and you're obviously sort of at an increased risk for suicide. And again, this is no different than, let's say, if I were to fall and hurt my wrist. If I didn't go to the doctor, I'm at risk for long-term major wrist issues. If I do go to the doctor, get it fixed up, great. A couple months, it's healed, I'm good to go. Same thing, let's say, like untreated diabetes or untreated hypertension. In itself, maybe for a couple days, couple weeks, couple months, couple years, not that big a deal, but left untreated, it becomes a major issue and a risk factor for developing long-term problems. So this is just a quick quiz. Anyone want to guess what the median time is between onset of mental health symptoms and when folks seek treatment?
Years.
10 years! A decade! Can you imagine if let's go back to my example, you fell and you broke your wrist. Can you imagine waiting 10 years to go to the doctor where you have this sort of chronic wrist pain? Like that just wouldn't happen. It would never ever happen, but it happens obviously all the time in the world of mental health. And I think these two questions, or I guess this first question, really to some degree answers why that is the case. I think there is a massive amount of stigma. It is decreasing, but I still think there is a significant amount of stigma around accessing mental health services. Do we know why that might be? Any thoughts on that?
Embarrassment.
Yeah, embarrassment. I see you shaking your head back there.
Yeah. Fear of job loss.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. 100% fear of job loss. That's a very reasonable thing, whereas you don't fear, sorry, I got to be out for a couple of weeks, I have a broken wrist. Like, I'm not going to lose your job, but if you're out for a couple of weeks for depression, people, even though legally you're not able to lose your job, people do worry about it for sure. And in terms of why fight stigma, I think it's pretty obvious. We want more people to get the help they need faster. No one needs to suffer with a mental illness. All those things are quite treatable. A lot of mental illnesses, anxiety, depression, those most common ones, they're as responsive to treatment as, most of your regular health illnesses, like your strep throat and your things like that. Like, we're really good at treating your basic mental health conditions. So this is just some brief stats. Nationally, about 50% of the people over the course of their lifetime will experience a mental illness. 20% of youth have a diagnosable mental health condition at any one time. Again, that's 1 in 5. I do know this off the top of my head about the number is more like 25% for older adults. Other things to think about is that most mental health and substance use disorders start in childhood or adolescence. Anxiety is definitely our most common mental health issue. Anyone want to guess the median age of onset for anxiety?
10.
You're very close, it's 11. And that's pre-pandemic. I don't know what things are post-pandemic. That sort of longer, like longitudinal data hasn't come out yet. But my gut, just based on who's showing up at the clinic that I run, or the clinics that I run, I'd say I'm guessing it's probably more like 10, maybe even 9. So these are just some signs and symptoms of mental health issues, and I feel like, I'm sorry, I'm flying through this information. Normally I have like an hour to get through all this, so I'm making it go real quick here. But signs and symptoms of mental health issues, these are fairly across the board. It doesn't even have to be limited to one particular mental health issue. These are general signs of mental health issues. So change in sleeping or eating, that's a big clue that you can notice easily, and sort of like as a non-mental health professional be like, my coworker's just coming in and just looks exhausted and has for like weeks on end. I wonder what's going on. Or like, I'm noticing they're like not even touching their lunch anymore. Frequent headaches or stomach aches. We see this all the time in schools, kids showing up at the nurse all the time with no sort of medical reason that they're showing up, but it doesn't mean that those headaches and stomach aches aren't real. They're a function of a mental illness or a potential mental illness. Increase in irritability, that's a big one, especially depression and anxiety. We see that irritability shoot up. Isolation from friends and family, feelings of loneliness, a decrease in just sort of general work performance, and a loss of interest in activities. And that's not the same thing, I think sometimes it's a little trickier because kids do change their sort of interest in activities over the course of their childhood. So it's not the same thing as like a kid being like, I'm not that into superheroes anymore when they're, 10 years old. It's like, well, kids start to outgrow things. But if it's, I'm not into superheroes and I'm not replaced my superhero interest with like, oh, I'm really into this like new art class or something like that, that I'm starting to worry about if we're just losing interest entirely. These are probably some of the most common mental health issues that we encounter. Anxiety is certainly number one, depression, eating disorders, substance use disorders are very common. I'm sure you guys are all aware of that just by living in the world. And just sort of any kind of clinically significant issue, managing changes to your life, managing stressors or life transitions. So, that might look like your children are leaving for college and all of a sudden you're an empty nester. And, it's normal to be a little bit sad about this and feel like, oh man, a little lost in like, what's my purpose in life kind of thought process. But it's very different than having a hard time leaving your house, or you can only get up and go to work, but you don't want to go out to dinner with your friends anymore. Your relationship with your partner is starting to suffer because of it. That's that clinically significant challenge or change that's based on the life sort of alteration. So I wanted to briefly talk a little bit about anxiety, only because it's so common. So anxiety is a really normal part of a healthy life. There is no one in this room, I'm assuming, that has not experienced anxiety. If you've never experienced any kind of anxiety, you need to go get your amygdala checked in your brain. Something is off in your brain structure. But it's essentially a feeling of nervousness or feeling tense, restless. A lot of people will experience that increased irritability piece. I know that when I'm anxious, I'm like, what? It's that sort of piece. And then the physical symptoms, those physiological symptoms are often one of the biggest sort of predictors or sort of indicators that you might have some anxiety going on. That butterflies in stomach, the racing heart, you're feeling really hot, you get headaches, whatever it might be. And again, those are real feelings. These are not like imaginary feelings. These are real, and it is why you see those kids end up in the nurse's office. But an anxiety disorder is where those symptoms that we've just talked about, that feeling tense, that the irritability, the feelings of butterflies in your stomach, whatever it may be, is so severe that it's impacting your day-to-day functioning. There's two primary types of anxiety disorders, and there's really a ton of them, but these are sort of the two major ones that we see. Social anxiety disorder, which is where basically it's exactly what it sounds like. You avoid social situations, or social situations are so anxiety-provoking that you're just completely focused on, oh my gosh, people are judging me, I'm embarrassed. The level of self-consciousness makes it so that you either, let's say, you have an interview lined up for a job and you are basically silent throughout the course of the interview, or you can't make eye contact with the interviewer. Or in school, it's a kid that never raises their hand in class, and if they are called on, it's like, oh no. That would be social anxiety disorder. Generalized anxiety disorders, again, it's sort of exactly what it sounds like. It's a more generalized fear that bad things are going to happen. It's just that constant worry, and both social anxiety and generalized anxiety disorder tend to lead to a lot of like racing thoughts, like you're ruminating, you cannot turn your brain off. So another really common one we hear about and we talk about a lot is depression. Depression is not a normal part of adolescent development. It is not a normal part of aging. Depression is not a normal part of life. It is a treatable medical condition, and I want to, again, remind people. Feeling sad, sure, that is an absolute normal part of life. Again, sort of along with the anxiety, something in your brain is not working right if you've never felt sad. But depression is something wholly different. Just some big risk factors that have become more and more prevalent. Girls and kids who identify as LGBTQ are just, their levels of depression and their risk for depression just skyrocketed in the last several years. This is wild to me. Almost 48% of Massachusetts high school students reported feeling depressed in, so the YRBS, it's the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. Earlier today, Kim Tynan and Roger, whose last name is escaping me right now, they sort of the director of wellness and counseling at Westborough High School. They presented on Westborough YRBS findings. I don't know the specific numbers in Westborough because I was not able to be at that. But again, across Massachusetts, nearly 40% of kids are reporting depression in those sort of like standard screenings. That's really, really high. And again, those results nationally are even higher. We in Massachusetts are incredibly lucky. We have wonderful support systems for around mental health. We have some of the most robust mental health systems really in the country. We're like top 5, and we still have this level of distress. So again, sadness versus depression, you can kind of read through this. Some of the major pieces are that like you can still function when you're sad. You still see hope for the future. Your sadness goes away. When you're depressed, you're just constantly irritable. You're constantly sad. It's just this, you think about Eeyore, from Winnie the Pooh with a cloud over his head. That's the depression where it's just always present. Constant feelings of worthlessness, hopelessness, guilt. Oftentimes there's major changes in your appetite and your sleep. Usually it's both sleeping too much and an inability to fall asleep. And some people just can't eat at all when they're depressed. Yeah.
I know we have a lot to get through, but can you just go back to that slide there?
Yeah, for sure.
When you talked about the self-reporting on the survey.
Oh, back here.
It says,
yeah.
Well, but this says, report being depressed. Okay, and then on the next slide, I'm curious how much of the distinction.
I think the way they describe the questions describe it.
Yeah. Okay.
More as like I don't know the exact question, but I've seen them. It looks
right, so
more like
it's
depression.
fully contextualized with regards to this versus that. We're
Yes.
not talking about that. This is.
Yes, they do provide some sort of context where it's like felt sad for 2 weeks straight kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is actually a diagnostic criteria for depression.
Great.
So they do describe it pretty in detail, even if they don't actually call it depression per se.
Yeah, okay, great, thanks.
Yeah, for sure. So again, we have 10 minutes left. There's no way I'm going to get through everything, and that's okay. But I just figured I'd give you guys some brief coping skills, only because everyone has been touched by mental health, right? Like there's no one in the world that isn't touched by mental health in some capacity. So if you're either using these for yourself or for a loved one, just someone that you know, that you care about, these can be really helpful. I cannot express enough the importance of deep breathing. It's really, really simple. It's free. And the data behind it is staggering. It is, so I'm not going to go into it all, but I can very briefly ask you guys to think back to high school when you learned about, the fight or flight system, right, in your brain. When you are, let's say, anxious, you're kind of living in that fight or flight brain. That's called your sympathetic nervous system. We want to get into our parasympathetic nervous system. So I'm gonna ask you to think super primitively for a minute. So back in the day when we were hunters and gatherers, and let's say we saw a lion hanging out on the side of the road, or, not the road, but, behind the bush, and you're, all of a sudden you're in fight or flight, like you just are, because you're like, oh man, there's a lion over there. Can you take a deep breath when you're in like that? No, you can't take a deep breath when you see that lion. So if you're able to calm your body enough to take just 3 deep breaths, your body will start to shut off that sympathetic nervous system and go into the parasympathetic nervous system, your rest and digest system, if you can, again, remember all the way back to high school. That's what data tells us, that's what science tells us. 3 deep breaths will start to turn off that sympathetic nervous system and turn on the parasympathetic nervous system. We're literally hacking our brains. It's a conscious skill to control something that is essentially an unconscious response. So one of the things you can do to really slow that breath is 1-to-2 ratio breathing. So you breathe in for 3 counts, breathe out for 6 counts. Repeat that 2 to 4 times. Breathe in for 4 counts, breathe out for 8 counts. It's that long, long exhale that really, really helps to turn on that parasympathetic nervous system. And obviously you're doing this only to what is comfortable for you. Don't pass out because I just helpful, and the out breath is really, really important. I don't want any trips to the emergency room on my count here. Other types of techniques, grounding techniques, sometimes we're really too keyed up to use deep breathing, like we're just too amped up. And this is sort of a way to sort of detach from whatever pain that is emotional that's causing you to be that amped up, and kind of focus your attention more on the outside world. So you can play a categories game, name dog breeds, name states that begin with the letter A, that type of thing. Describe an activity in very, very great detail, you guys maybe have heard of how do you teach someone how to make a peanut butter sandwich? It's that type of thing. Hold an ice pack, that's a big one, or wait for an ice cube to melt. I use that one all the time with my kids at home when they're stressed. Hey, go grab an ice pack. They're probably sick to death of hearing me say that. This is one of my favorites. Keep a sponge in the freezer and use it like a stress ball. It feels weird to just squeeze a really cold sponge, and also the cold will kind of shock you a little bit. If you want to be really fancy, throw a little lavender oil or something on so you can inhale the scents at the same time. You can do some muscle tension and release. So grab onto a chair really, really hard. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can kind of see them here. There's tons of them that are out there. So if you're around someone who is quite overwhelmed and you want to support them, these are some things you can do. You can model deep breathing for them. Even if you're not saying, hey, so I'm going to deep breathe right now, you can just sort of slowly, and that can actually encourage, very subtly, it's called co-regulation, someone else to sort of do the same thing. You always want to be speaking slowly and using sort of simple directions. If someone is really, really amped up, you're not there, again, likely in their fight or flight brain. When you're in your fight or flight brain, you can't access this prefrontal cortex or the thinking part of your brain very well. You literally do not have that capacity to get to your thinking part of your brain as well as you do if you're not in fight or flight. So if you can't access that thinking part of your brain, you need the very, very simple directions. And that can be hard, especially, let's say, if it's a kid who's amped up and you're kind of fighting with your child or something like that, or you're fighting with your spouse. Remind yourself, they're not able to sort of intake the information the way they ordinarily would. Try to always avoid dismissing feelings. It's, why are you angry about this? That's stupid. You shouldn't be angry about this. This is a nothing thing. Those are their feelings. The feelings are valid. The reaction may be more significant than we want it, but we don't want to dismiss the feeling. You can always say, I can talk more later if that's a reasonable expectation or a reasonable option. When you do have the time to talk to someone, how to listen. It is one of the hardest things to do well. Really easy to talk, really difficult to listen well. And this first bullet point I talk about all the time with the staff that I train. I train master's level clinicians. It's a large part of my job. The hardest thing to do is to sit with somebody else's pain. sometimes like, I'm so sorry this happened to you. Can I just sit here with you in your pain and be in pain with you? Can I share this pain with you? Can I try to take some of that on for you? That can be a tremendously helpful answer or something to say, because you can't fix it. You can't make something bad that happened go away, but you can make someone feel less alone in their pain. Let go with a perfect answer. That's not a thing. There's no one thing that you're gonna say that's gonna make it better. Again, just being there with someone can be incredibly helpful. Just FYI before we end, suicide is actually one of the leading causes of death in the United States, particularly for young people. Almost a quarter of high school students have considered suicide. That is an alarmingly high number. 17.5% about have made a plan. And again, these rates are much higher for girls and LGBTQ youth. Much, much higher. The good news, if there's any good news about suicide, is that it's usually preventable. If someone makes any kind of statement around suicide, take it seriously. It's not often that you're gonna have someone come up to you and be like, hey, I'm feeling really suicidal, or I've been thinking about killing myself. These are the statements. Life is just too hard. It would be easier if I went to bed and didn't wake up in the morning. Life would be better if I wasn't here. Those are the suicidal statements you're much more likely to hear. So again, if you hear someone talking about that, please address it. So this is more for schools and workplaces. If there's a policy, if you need a policy if you don't have a policy, make a policy on how to respond. Again, clearly this is meant for schools here. Inform the parent or guardian of the student, share resources, and don't hesitate to call 911. But it's really, really important to take it seriously. I'm gonna skip this last piece because we are out of time, but I will get to, just so you guys can have it. Just some resources here. And again, I don't know why this particular slide deck downloaded and not the one that I tried to download, but advocates, which I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it's advocates that is gonna be the crisis, like emergency mental health place in Westborough, it's called.